Welcome to the Black Chair, where we talk to creatives, and today's guest is Daniel Bornstein, a photographer, musician, and he lives in St Kilda here in Melbourne. Hi Daniel, welcome and thank you for joining us in the Black Chair and being so courageous to let come up what's going to come up, because we are not working to a script here. And I'm just interested and very excited to introduce you to our viewers, and hopefully they get as much joy out of as what I get out of your work and the way I have known you over the many years.
Well, thank you very much. I always try my best to bring joy to those around me. So any opportunity I get, I'll take.
Great. Well, I'm not really sure what you feel you would like to, tell people about you, but it would be nice if you could give us a little bit of a kind of a background of sort of slices of who you are. Of course, we are not going to manage to get all of you, but aspects of it. You are so many, as you know. I'm also a milliner in my life, and hat metaphors keep slipping in all the time, and there's many hats you wear, and I know that one of the hats you do wear is you are an amazing photographer, and I also know another hat is you are that great musician. So what can you tell us about those two hats?
I think both hats are hats, things which I enjoy very much, and are both connected, I suppose, to creative expression is the way, like a lot of people would be looking for creative expression in those kind of things. Or for me, I think what I really like about both those things is the ability to tell a story, and also potentially shed some perspective on things that maybe people haven't had before. So I think photography is a really interesting art form, because you definitely create in photography, and you tell a story in terms of the way that you compose a picture, you choose subject matter, like all of these things, but you present something which theoretically anybody can see. So two people will be at the same scene, two people will see something happen, and two people will see very different things. And so photography, I guess, is a way to express what you have seen in that moment. And I think music is in many ways the same thing as well. Music, a lot of people use to just express themselves, and so two people will experience the same emotion, say, or whatever it is, happiness, sadness, or love, or whatever. But they'll experience it in very different ways, and they'll express it in very different ways. And so music provides an opportunity to do that. And so I guess for me, a lot of my art is about taking things which everybody sees and presenting them in a way which I suppose is somewhat unique to my perspective.
That's interesting, because what I'm wondering about with the music you do, which comes from deeply inside, and you performing the music for others to listen to, or for yourself, and where photography, I would have thought there's an element where you do the photography for your own art, and the other part is when people employ you to do photography, there's limitations placed upon you, I would have thought, with photography, more so than with music. Or would you find that is not the case?
I think there are always limitations. Well, in any situation where you're engaged to do something for something, there are going to be limitations, because there's going to be a brief, and there's going to be things that you have to do. I think to an extent it's the same with music, although I think in both situations people engage you because they usually have seen your work, or have at least glanced at the work after you've been recommended, and they will make choices about whether the style of the work that you produce meets what they want. So theoretically, you'll already have been to some extent screened. So the people will want you to produce the sort of work that you already produce. But still, you know, like the same way with photography, someone will say, I want a corporate headshot or whatever it is, and that comes with a whole lot of constraints. Also, if somebody engages you for a gig, they say, we want you to play a wedding. There's very particular things usually that people will need from that kind of music, you know, because it's, again, if it's background music or if it's supposed to engage people or get people dancing or whatever, different types of music will have that effect differently. And so you get sort of the same limitations, but you know, there's freedom to make choices within that.
As this show is about the creative and how we use creativity, you know, that brings up what you were just saying. You get people dancing and you have limitations, or you're working with your creativity for others. That brings me to the question and wondering about how do you use that creativity for yourself?
How do I use the creativity
for
myself?
yourself? Yeah. How do you know, like when you play the music, you play the music and you affect other people in it. And they hear it the way they hear it. They either dance to it or they have an emotion when they look at that photography, the finished product, what you are delivering. How, if, you know, you might not, but what do you think, how does that creativity, does that become helpful for you in your own joy, in your own well-being? Do you use it for motivating yourself, or lingering in sadness, or getting yourself out of sadness, which I assume you have emotions like that throughout life? Because even if we live in a world where it seems we are portraying that we have this perfect life, because social media is all about that. There's just smiles and happiness, and nobody has reason to be unhappy, which we know is not the case. So I'm wondering, how do you use your practice for your own emotional well-being, if at all?
Yeah, interesting. Something I should say about my practice is, I guess the way that we've been talking about both music and photography at the moment is the way that I suppose the way that it's performed, or the way that it's presented to other people. And so in terms of music as gigs, and photography as also as gigs, I guess, as commissioned work or whatever the case. But my interest in both photography and music, like that, I guess, is probably more of a byproduct. Well, not exactly a byproduct, but my interest isn't in so much the end product as it is in the process, of course. And so for me, most of what I value in music making is is group music making, is social music making. And so the performance aspect of it plays into that, in the sense that the performance is almost like a summary of the music that you make with people in groups and then present it outside. But it's not what I enjoy the most about music, in the same way that, like in photography, the commissioned work I produce often isn't as interesting to me as, say, personal work. Or even if that's the case, what I enjoy about producing the work isn't the finished product that I deliver, it's the collaborative process of creating that product.
So when you say collaborative, you're obviously working with other people?
Yeah, I think
you're part of a band. And what do you actually play?
Oh, good question. I play the banjo, is probably my first instrument, and also the ukulele. And so, say in the band that I'm in at the moment, that's probably doing well, or doing the best, is it's a duo called the Grubby Urchins.
The Grubby Urchins.
The Grubby Urchins.
How did you come up with this name?
Good question. We, as I said, we're a duo, so it's a friend and I, and we had played together quite a lot at just different festivals, around fireside jams, that kind of thing, different sessions. When I was living in Montreal, he came to visit me in Montreal, and I said, well, if you come, I'm going to get us some gigs. We need a name. And we agreed that we needed a name. And so we just kind of thought about different names, and we sort of worked through different things until we found kind of, I suppose because he was traveling and just the way I was living at the moment, like we kind of played quite a lot on, and two banjo players, the aesthetic of having, both of us wearing overalls and maybe not wearing shoes or whatever. So it sort of made sense to go with that kind of urchin child sort of aesthetic, or recall to mind that. And
so it was a birth in a particular. So you actually embraced that moment in life where you embraced where you were at to find this appropriate naming of that new child, baby you gave birth to, if we want to sort of see that in a metaphoric speaking. And how do you feel about this now, having, this is behind you? How do you feel about the name? Do you feel that's still appropriate, and you want to, that still gives you that sense of, sort of what do I mean by that? It's sort of that sense of I love that name, this belongs to me, this says a lot.
I think the name has served us well. It's a very good name.
I love it. I think it's great. It provokes a lot of images when you hear it. You know, for me it was the grubbiness. What you were saying about the bare feet, and I know you in bare feet, and that's very much part of your life. You own how you feel at the time. You are not playing to anybody else's tune, but your own. If that would be right to say that?
Sure.
Yeah. And urchin, somehow this is sort of big to me. I see big, big and powerful and scary at the same time as well. But like artwork, I'm reminded now, but as I'm saying this, it's like artwork. You hear a name, you put your own pictures to it, you have your assumptions. It's like with the art, I stand in front of it, what does it do to me, and what did you want to express?
So I suppose to take that back to what I was saying before about, I like the idea that art can take something that everybody looks at and present potentially a new perspective on that. I think what's great about the Grubby Urchins and what's great about like that name and what we do is that it plays on the expectations that people will bring to that. And so like it is like an evocative name, and it's like a bit silly, and it suggests that we will be silly, which I think we are. But I think there's something about, so like my bandmate is conservatory trained, and I think that the level of music we provide on some levels is quite complex, and maybe is more complex than people would expect from like having a silly name and a silly aesthetic and all that kind of thing. And so I think there's something a little bit disarming in the sense that we provide a product that's in line with the expectations that are brought about by the name and the image and all the content we have on our website and whatever. But I think we try to like slip in a little something else that calls to mind something a little more than people expected. And you sort of slip it into the package with the rest of it. And I think that's kind of, I enjoy doing things that way, and so I think photography is really good for that as well, because you look at a photograph and you bring a lot of expectations to looking at a photograph. So like when you look at any work, the first thing, especially something photographic, you're trying to make sense of what you're seeing. And with a photograph, it's usually quite easy to do because it's an image of something which exists, and so you can recognize that immediately. And then you have sort of the higher order stuff happening where you start to like make sense of the elements you're seeing and bring them together into the narrative that picture tells. And if you can slip something in that people maybe don't expect, different angle, different facial expression in a portrait, that like all these kind of things, or like draw focus somewhere else, I think you can start to like slip in other ideas. Yeah,
different angle and not to expect. That throws me right into a memory, having seen you years ago, because your photography is quite unusual as well. You are not sort of your normal Joe Bloke photographer who walks down the road with a camera. I mean, even so, you have a camera with you often. But I have seen you walking around with that thingy-majig. What do you call that old-fashioned stand with the black hood?
Oh.
You know, you pull over your head.
Yeah.
You have taken amazing images and worked with that. So can you talk a little bit to that, please?
Sure. So, yeah, in my portrait photography, I work a lot with large format, and particularly with what they call monorail cameras or view cameras or even sometimes studio cameras. It's quite a large camera and a very old-fashioned camera. The design of them hasn't really changed since the 1920s, except for the materials used and that sort of thing.
So the thingy-majig I saw you with, the 1920 cameras, that wasn't an original one. It's a new one looking like the old ones.
I have quite a few, so I have some original ones actually dating from the 19th century, but the one that I most often use was built in the 90s. It's made from aluminium. Like I said, the principle hasn't changed, so it's more or less the same, but just the materials are obviously a little bit more modern. It's a bit more durable and it's much lighter, so you've gone from a 20 kilo kit to a 1 kilo kit.
Right.
So it's
still very cumbersome, to
still
drag
quite
that
cumbersome.
around.
Well, because you need to use you have to use a tripod. You have to use a dark cloth because you're focusing on ground glass. So to see the image, you need to kind of go under the thing, and it's upside down and backwards. So you got to sort of figure out what's happening, or you start to get used to seeing it that way. But I think because of the process, to focus, you have to move the two standards, so like the lens and basically where you put the film are on sort of like a rack and pinion, and so to focus you move those, and that's why the bellows extends, and you lock everything down into place once you're focused between the time that you have to then close the lens and take the image and the whole thing. And I think just because of how involved the process is, there's a real aspect of, in a way, theatre or performance, but also it's like a real slowing of the image-making process, and I think it gives time to interact with your sitter. I use it for portraits. There are a lot of reasons to use that kind of system, but what I like about it is just that extra time that the process takes gives the sitter time to really like adjust into the image, think about the kind of image that they want to create or the kind of image that they want to project. And so I think in that sense, using that kind of camera system allows for a much more collaborative portrait to be produced, say, than you would usually get with a photographer, where the photographer kind of understands the image and understands what's going on. The sitter usually is just kind of, they might have some ideas of the image being created, but I think it's a lot less collaborative.
I love what you just said. Listening to you, I noticed that I had this big breath. I took and breathed out, and there's a sense of you are allowing with that camera space. You're allowing a pause to happen, and you are calling this indirecting and slowing down, because we do live in a world which is so fast and so we have this expectation, take the shot, touch it a bit up and email it to me. And there's no space or room anymore to actually feel the emotion or the space between photographer and subject, or the subject on its own, to interact in. I really like that, and I have seen images you have done, and they have that quality of, well, I do like the graininess, what I saw, so that is really lovely. And that could speak to my age, because I grew up with photography, not that I'm born in the 1920s, but the images are very grainy and have that kind of old worthy feeling to it. So it might appeal to me because of that, but what appeals to me is that time that you really cannot just click away, click, 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 and then we have 20 or 30 shots, and then we choose the best one out of it. There's skill, there's patience, and there seems to be listening and feeling comes back with that. So that's a beautiful thing.
That's a very different way of working, and you get a very different aesthetic for sure. I also like that camera gives you, you get the opportunity to really, you can control focus in a way that you can't do with any other type of camera. And so I think,
okay. Is that so?
yeah.
How so?
Just because you can move the image plane, so where the film is, and you can move the lens independently of each other, which you usually can't do with sort of typical camera setups. There are ways that you can do it slightly, so there are certain lenses you can buy that allow for some of that movement, but that camera gives you full control of it.
Now, that is so interesting. You know what comes up for me when I hear you say that? It reminds me of the way we look at life as people through our lens. You know, we have that lens we're looking through, but we have control over our lens. How we can't buy a new set of eyes, and we have utter control over how we are viewing something, and we can adjust our lens as human beings, which is in a way not possible with that. What I mean by this is, if we learn enough about it, about ourselves, and are curious, inquiring, you know, what are we made of, who are we, or what makes us tick, and pull back layers of being introjecting oneself immerse ourselves in our life, and get help with that, you know. Hence we see a therapist, or we do it through self-help books, but we are interested and curious, which will lead to more learning, therefore to more skill to adjust our lens and focus in a different way, and see a situation, friends, life, our life situation in different ways. Because I can't buy a new one, as we can do with our iPhones and our snappy cameras we all have. I so love that. That's such a great metaphor.
Oh, for sure. And I think, like, when I say that my work's about presenting things in new perspective, that's exactly what I mean. The fact that everybody has a lens through which they view everything, all of their life.
But it's not fixed.
Yeah, everything's adjustable.
Some people, yes, with your work it's adjustable, and there's also human beings, I believe. We have a fixed lens on something, or a fixed belief. This is how it is, black or white. But there's lots of color in between, and the shades, and how, and that doesn't just happen. That needs to be studied, learned. A curiosity needs to be part of this. A curiosity of what else is there? What else can I do? I guess of a lifelong learning, which is practically in your practice, and just the fact that we live as people, and how do we want to grow?
Sure. So, okay, to run with a little black and white filter metaphor, in photography, when you convert an image from color to black and white, there are a lot of ways you can do it. One is you can just literally strip out all of the color. So you take the values, like the brightness values as they are, and you take out all of the color so that everything is just a shade of gray. And then you get an image exactly as the sensor has recorded it, digital sensor has recorded it, or film, or whatever it is, but just without color. But it doesn't always look the best that it can look. So there's other ways you can do it, where you strip out certain color values at different brightnesses. And so in film photography, black and white film is more sensitive to different color spectrums. So if you use certain filters, different things, which in the real world are color, come out with different brightness values. So say there are a couple of films that have been made in the last few years. So The Lighthouse is an example of a movie that came out this year that was shot in, well, the film is in black and white, but they've got a look that they say they were going for an orthochromatic look, which means it's the old orthochromatic film. Orthochromatic film was sensitive to blue light and had almost no sensitivity to red light. And that's why when you work in photographic darkrooms, you can use red light. You can look at the image you're seeing without exposing it on the film, because the film just isn't sensitive to that kind of light. The look that you get when you're photographing faces is that skin tones come out quite dark, because there's quite a lot of red in skin. So when they say they're going from an orthochromatic look, it means the way that they've converted it to black and white, they've converted it with, the skin tones come out much darker than they otherwise would. Lips come out almost, black, because there's a lot of red in lips. Your glass, the frames you're wearing, would come out black. And there's lots of different ways.
As you know, we are shooting in black and white.
That's true, exactly.
And so I'm not sure if you actually are aware of that, but that's what we are doing, and it's an interesting perspective, or that you are speaking to this, and that seems to be, is that a fashion at the moment? Is being Lighthouse being a movie which has been shot like this? We are also living in a time where black and white is very much in our social sphere of being spoken about. The racial undertones, white supremacy, and it's something, the black and white thinking we have as humans often, and how do we navigate that? And the way you just have given me that example, which is a little bit over my head, I must say, because I'm sure there might be photographers or people listening to this. It makes total sense what you're actually saying when something is stripped away. But I was, as I was listening to you, what comes up for me is being stripped away color and seeing black and white, which me is I'm obviously hearing you with the ears and through the lens of a therapist. What would that feel like, and is depression and sadness in people's life exactly that? We are having this grey monochromatic way of seeing the world. Color is stripped away. And how do we get this color back in, and that it has different layers and can look in a different way, again with adding a different lens, or sharpening our lens, or adjusting something. That's what I'm hearing as I'm listening, even so I know you're speaking about your art, and it has, for a creative, me being a creative myself, I found that if I am listening and hearing and in my own work, trying to see metaphors, it has helped me over my life of depression and the adversities I have gone through over the years. There's always been a savior within that work. There was always a hook.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Who is talking to me? Siri. She wants to be involved in our discussion. How about that? Siri, thank you. We do not need you.
My pleasure.
This is scary.
It is a bit.
Wow. How about that? Okay, well, she had her part. So anyway, where were we? Yes, the creative, and that it helped me, and the I found a hook. Now I guess the question is to you. Do you use it at all in that way? Does it help you, or has it helped you in the past? I mean, you're so much younger than I am. You're in your 20s. But I remember very well what my 20s felt like, and how confusing, and there was no internet to help my anxiety, to calm my anxiety on one level by finding out about my anxiety, And at the same time, it probably was a blessing because the internet also adds a lot of anxiety for your age group. Instagram, Facebook, social media. I didn't have to deal with that on top of how I felt about life and myself. So it was at different times, but the feelings and how did the art help me? How does that differ?
I suppose I said before that, I said earlier that the art that I produce, or let's say the artifacts that I produce, so either the performance or the actual photographic prints or photographs that I produce are byproducts of of the process of making art, which is the valuable part for me. And I suppose my art comes about as like a result of the way that I think and different ways that I use to try and, like, different lenses that I use to see the world, or different filters that I apply to information that's coming in. And so I think, talking about the internet and access to information there, you say it's has the ability to relieve or create anxiety.
It's a question. I'm wondering. I'm not
yeah.
saying that is so. I'm taking myself as an example and wonder,
Sure.
would it have helped me if I had it?
Sure.
Would my life been easier
Sure.
or more anxious?
I think in terms of being able to further your knowledge or develop the way you think, you always need access to information. You always need to use information and take on new information. And there's lots of ways you can do that. You can do it efficiently or inefficiently. If you can't see an effective way to do it, I think that's very anxiety-inducing. So that it's very stressful to know that you have access to a lot of information, but not understand how to make the best of that information. And I think in that case, it's really useful to have filters, or the ability to filter information and present it in hierarchies which make it basically consumable for you and your brain. And so something like a search engine, so like Google is something that we use to filter information that's available to us, the whole of the internet, but we use certain words and phrases which we give to Google, and it gives us back results that we can use and make information meaningful to us. And I think art is another filter for that. And we spoke as well about the limitations of art before. I think the limitations are that filter, and the limitations are the thing which makes it possible. The fact that we can understand something within boundaries is what makes it manageable and surmountable. So say when you're creating a hat has limitations in that it's something that should go on someone's head, so it can't be too heavy or you're going to break their neck, and it's got to be a certain size, and to an extent, and you can break those rules to an extent as well, but you need to understand those rules to be able to effectively break them. And so having those rules and having those boundaries and having a good understanding of those rules and boundaries, I think, allows you to understand how you can break them and allows you to understand the world at large a lot better, and is a filter for understanding the world at large. And I think art is a really good thing for that, because it's just a way to explore boundaries in a really free and easy way.
Totally. And knowing surprisingly so much about a hat and what a hat is supposed to be, but you are totally right. The knowledge and what is the hat? That's the first question. What is the job of that particular hat I am choosing to wear? And that can be a metaphoric one, like right now I'm wearing the hat of an interviewer. I'm speaking to you, we're having a conversation. I am still within that. There's also another hat on top of it, which is sort of the hat of the therapist. Then there's the hat of the milliner. Then there's the hat of the parent. Even so, my adult children are grown up. The partner, the friend. So there is quite a few hats being part of me, but in lightly. They're sort of they're there. But if it's a hat, a real hat, one needs to wear, that could be, okay, where's this hat going? Is this hat actually going somewhere on a person, or is this hat going to just be worn for an image? You photographing me in a hat, and you're gonna create this image. Never mind that it's held together with pins and sticky tape and stapled, because you're not seeing that on the image. So it has a different look. It could be really heavy, but the photograph won't show that. Is it a mock-up shot? Is it shot? Is it for media? And again, we see this on social media a lot, that there is this lie, or illusion, or a longing is portrayed. So it could be either one of those. You know, some people really lie because or others, they would like it to be like this, and it isn't. So again, the art understanding what you are, if I understand you right, you need to understand the limitation of the subject and yourself and your skill in order to create something. Is that what you said, or am I hearing you wrong?
Well, they inform each other. So in creating something, you need to come to an understanding of the materials you're working with and the boundaries of, you know, whatever you're producing, or the limitations of the art. But I think something that a lot of people's art practices allows them to do is find those limitations and boundaries through exploration, which I think a lot of the other ways that people gather information, they think of it differently. They have a starting point, and they sort of they hone inwards from there. They understand the boundaries, and they try to come to an understanding of everything inside those boundaries by working inwards. So it's kind of this, I guess you might say, like centripetal working method. Whereas art, I think, can be more like centrifugal. So you can have a starting point, and you can know that there are limitations and boundaries out there, but you don't have to fully understand what they are. You can just explore your way out till you find them. And so I think a lot of people find art, you know, really useful in that it's one of the few legitimized ways that I think people can explore and continue to explore. And indeed, I would say you have to explore to be able to keep producing new things. And you can use that exploration to like broaden your horizon or your scope of thinking or like scope of understanding. And so I think, like, take it back to like say mental health, you know, when people get into like stuck in anxiety loops and this kind of thing, you get stuck in this thing where you think like your thoughts go in a really circular way. You have boundaries which are set up around your thoughts, and you keep going around the same thing. You're thinking the same things, and there's no way to break out of that. There's nothing to break that loop. And so I think art can really help people in that sense, because art gives them a way, like a starting point where like they might come in, say, with the same anxieties running around their heads of like what's dangerous or safe or like whatever else, doesn't matter what they are, but just through exploration you'll accidentally move outside that loop, and you'll break that loop, and you can get out like that.
It's sort of going back to your contraption of photography. Art would provide little different sheets of lenses, which gives you, it's an exploration, which gives you a chance to try something with crayons and colors and scissors and tape and wire, whatever it might be, clay, and then realize, oh my God, look at that. And a little bit of color gets added, and that wall of the boundaries, the anxiety runs within, to use your explanation, gets cracked or leaks or lets something in, which makes me think of Leonard Cohen. There's a crack in everything where the light gets in. And I feel this is what art is as well. There's a crack in everything where the light gets in, and you can let light in through the exploration of something creative, be it music. As we know, he penetrated us with his music in many ways. Well, not everyone, but certainly me. I've been in love with this man since I'm 14 years old. He was in Greece at the time. But not to stray away and talk about Leonard Cohen, I would also like to come to another work I'm aware you do, is you document artwork, and you document creative projects of other people, which in a way gives you a glimpse into the art and thoughts and expression almost in a voyeuristic way. I would have thought, as you do you see it? Do you look at it? Or do you just see the technical aspect of what you have to do? So maybe explain what I'm actually asking you, what the work you do.
Sure. I suppose I've done a fair bit of work working as, like, might say an archivist, or like going through people's archives and documenting them.
Art archives.
Art archives. So specifically photography, I've done a lot of work in, but I've done some work with painters or other people that work in other methods. But even just copy work. For last week, I copied a diary, someone's just personal diary. And I think you're right. It's like when you document something. So say documenting a diary, you're photographing every page. So you look at it from a really like top-down view. You see the whole thing. And I suppose, okay, maybe I'm going to get a little bit abstract here, but like to try and tie it in with what we were saying before about the way that we view the world. Our eyes see everything. Our eyes take in everything in the visual field, but your brain arranges that information into hierarchies. So you only see the things that your brain thinks are important enough to make it into your consciousness, right? So even though your visual field is recording everything, your retinas see everything that's there, on a conscious level, you only see the things that your brain thinks are important.
I really can see and hear you are a photographer. You are talking like a camera.
Well, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about a camera, and so for a lot of people, seeing photographs is a real eye-opener because they are presented with everything that would usually their retinas would see, but their eyes would only see one thing. So when you look at a face, you usually only look at the eyes. When you look at a photograph of a face, you have more time to look at a static shot of that face. And so you'll see things that you don't usually notice, like the fact that the largest thing on someone's face is actually their nose, not their eyes, or the fact that your eyes don't really start until halfway up into their head.
So that's the kind of thing you see when you archive. And by archiving, we mean you take photographs of those items in order to digitize them, so there is a secure copy just in case something happens. And so you're saying this is how you view, so you view the work, that you see details which otherwise wouldn't be seen because you're looking for the perfect shot to shoot what had someone else has created.
So the most effective way of recording, whatever you need to record. And so that's not necessarily, if someone says, I've got this diary, I want you to copy the diary, they don't mean I want you to copy the book. I like that. Usually they mean from the perspective of I'm interested in what's in the diary, so the text in the diary. But, if they were, say, a bookbinder and they wanted to know more about the binding, they might say, I want you to copy this diary in the sense that I want to know more about the binding. And so their needs are going to be very different to the person who wants to, like, the content of the diary. So you're going to need to photograph, like, the way the book's joined together, whether there's glue, whether there's stitching. But most people don't care about that. If you want the content of the book, you just want the information on the pages. You don't care what form the binding takes. So it's like, as the person who's making those copies, you're constantly making choices about what to record and how to prioritize what you're recording. Prioritize the data that you're taking in, collating and presenting. And artists do that every day. When you take a photograph as a photographer, you decide what to include in your composition. Even more so if you're painting or drawing or whatever. If you're drawing a model or whatever, drawing a person, you're deciding whether to include elements of the background or not in your composition, all of those kind of things. You're always making choices about, you might say, the resolution of the image, or like what's recorded or not recorded, like what's important or not important information. And if you're recording something archivally, that is like forever. You know, so say if you want to record something exhaustively, every aspect of that item or every aspect of that artifact, you aren't going to make the same choices. Or
I just laughed now, not what you said. It's just the thought which came up when you said you archive exhaustively, because every aspect, every I thought of analysis. So if you really want to get a big volume of understanding or deep understanding, and you go and might see an analyst. That where my giggle was, where when you were saying about most people just want they want to read the diary, they don't care how the binding in the pages fall off, and I'm envisaging the way we tell stories or remember our history, and remember if something happened, we remember that so and so did this, but we don't really quite understand how it led to this, because that part we have forgotten and we don't care about that. All I care about is that I didn't get my ice cream, or that I didn't get a present, or so that's the writing, the story. And again, the whole diary, if we take it from as a metaphor, that the diary is the person, the human being. There's a person who has written that diary. And that person is made up of so many facets, and the page, the glue, the binding, the colors they've chosen, the book they're writing in, where they wrote it, how they wrote it, what were they feeling, how old were they, and is only in all of that. And that even if that person who has written the diary would speak about that or to the diary right now and the content, would most likely not be able to say all of it either, because there's so much more goes in, because we don't know about the paper mill. We don't know about where it was printed and where the trees are from, the paper is made, as we don't know what made us as a psyche, as humans, that we are so complex, and that we might be able to take a photograph and archive it, and we have a digital copy, but only of an aspect you're speaking to. That, yeah, wow. Look, it might sound, some people listening to this might go, what is she on about? Because it might be too hypothetical and too metaphorical. But I'm sure there's people who totally get that, or
certainly I think, you get a completely different sense of a person meeting them face to face or chatting with them online, in the same way that you get a completely different sense of a person reading a typed transcription of what's in their diary, or reading their actual diary, for the same reasons you just said. The choices that they make in terms of, like, did they buy a diary, did they make a diary, put it together themselves, have they used cheap components, expensive components, does it look like they've used a fountain pen, do they prefer, like, there's all these things which speak a lot about the person. Even the fact that they've recorded a diary is a cultural thing which really places them. Like, there's a lot of meta information that comes about. The same way when you meet a person, is the person wearing perfume? Is the person wearing cheap shoes? Or has the person chosen to put in earrings or lipstick, whatever? Like, there's a billion things that you perceive on an unconscious level. So even if you don't see them, you perceive them. And all these things affect the choices that you make about people, and not just people, the whole world. It's everything, And all these things are designed in on some level, consciously or unconsciously. And so I think it's a really interesting exercise to try and, like, step back as much as possible and break down, like, the patterns that you're using to see all these things, or the things that you don't see when you perceive. And I think anything that you can do to further your understanding of that is always going to be at least an interesting exercise, or at most like an epiphany. So.
That is a very, very nice way to finish on. And I am ever so grateful you came in. I really enjoyed this conversation. I have had many conversations with you, but it's so much came up for me today, and you have provoked ideas and thoughts which haven't been there beforehand. So thank you, Daniel, for offering what you had to offer, and I'll see you hopefully around the tracks.
I'm sure you will. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So that is it.